Hello, YouTube! Normally, I'm the guy making videos about other people's creations, but today I am running down the latest Ludum Dare game jam and just going over my history of what it's like to be an amateur hobbyist solo game developer. Everything you're about to see is featured on my itch.io page, which I will link underneath this video if you want to try out any of these games for yourself. All of them can even be played directly in your browser, no downloading required. Before I delve too much into game jams in general, let's go back to the origin point. Back in 2022, after doing the typical song and dance following a handful of Unity tutorial series, I decided to escape what people refer to as tutorial hell and make my own full-blown game. Satan's Shakers was a game built around the familiar mechanics of dice games such as Yahtzee, adding a twist of playing against an opponent who can and will cheat to win. Like most of my games tend to, it was filled with what I lovingly refer to as programmer art. The game has an odd sense of humor. Some of the lines still do make me chuckle a bit, while others feel a bit outdated, maybe even tired. This marked the first time I dealt with a bunch of systems, like 3D models and computer-controlled AI logic. The game even features an achievement system that also applies to score. Some of the code has never been tested, and probably there's things in this game that have been found by no one. To be quite honest, I don't even remember what some of the hidden goals are. It was also my first time experimenting with music, a skill I still have not fully developed. I love music, but lack a lot of theory, so creating tracks is usually a bit experimental. It's a lot of just putting notes down and just hoping they sound right. The soundtrack for Satan's Shakers is a bit all over the map, but it has a decent amount of variety. Playing this game again for this video made me surprised exactly how polished the game feels. The pacing, it's pretty abysmal, to be quite honest, and I distinctly remember the code being very sloppy and hard to edit towards the end. A lot of time this is referred to as spaghetti code, where it becomes difficult to edit one thing as it will then break a handful of other features. Ultimately, for a first-time project, I'm not too upset about how this one turned out. While it took far too long to complete for what it is, it's a playable game that matches the original vision. Satan's Shakers will always hold that special place of being the first release. Cut to a year later, I had mostly fallen off of programming. Releasing a game was a strange process of spending months of your life creating a thing that very few people actually saw. To this date, Satan's Shakers has been played 64 times and downloaded only 6. And I'm pretty sure a handful of those downloads are me. It kind of felt like I was spending hundreds of hours on work for nobody but myself. Well, that may still be worth it. It still felt a bit isolating, not connecting with others. At this point, I decided if I was going to take another stab at coding, I wanted to do it on a more challenging scale without investing as much time. I'd always wanted to do a game jam, and one of the more popular ones I had always heard of was Ludum Dare, which is pronounced Ludum Dare, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call it Ludum Dare from here on out. I think it's a little bit easier for people to process. At the time, Ludum Dare was running twice a year, and I began doing tutorials again in preparation for Ludum Dare number 54. A jam is a sprint event of sorts where you work as either an individual or a team to create a game in a limited time period from start to finish. A theme for the jam is given out at the start time, and everyone does their own interpretations of the theme. While there are multiple different jam rule sets you can opt into, the one I chose to enter in was one of the most popular rule set, which is a 72-hour period to make a game, usually taking place from a Friday to a Monday. I made the decision to enter as a solo developer to really get practice in all aspects of game design. The theme for Ludum Dare 54 was limited space, and I began creation on a game called Clogged Tube. Maybe not the best name in retrospect, this game was about trying to survive on a subway without bumping into other people. A game about anxiety and crowded space that could be a bit of a low-stakes, simple concept. If you've ever thought about doing a jam, step one should always be to scope properly. The easier the concept, the more time you'll have to polish and work on fine details. Exist on the subway, ride it for as long as you can, and try not to get into anyone else's space. Every so often, the subway stops and more people get on, making the game increasingly difficult. There are a variety of character types that have different movement patterns, but all look the same to help readability. Clogtube was a stressful experience, but something I learned so much from. This was my second, and oddly enough, also ended up being my final project created in Unity. I experimented with a new kind of art style that I haven't ever revisited, drawing the characters with almost a South Park look from directly above so they could easily be moved in a grid. Time prevented this game from having any sort of soundtrack, but instead used MIDI sound effects for doors and movement. I also did some audio recordings that ended up being pretty heavily edited that would randomly play whenever the player bumps into an obstacle.
I'm sorry.
By the end of development of Clogtube, I was rushing code and doing so many major last-minute changes that this is by far the buggiest project I've ever released. The further into the game you get, sometimes characters do odd overlapping or get into endless loops running into each other. When this game released at the 72-hour mark of the jam, I had been still coding mere seconds before. Do not use this as advice. But some of the game's final code was not even tested before submission. I actually cannot believe it works as well as it does. I am by no means a strong programmer. The other half of Ludum Dare is when you release a game, you then spend the next 2.5 weeks playing other people's games and giving feedback. Games are given star ratings in a number of categories and averaged out. There's an algorithm where the more games you rate, the more your game is pushed out to people. There's also bonus points for giving people feedback that they can then like. It's a community-based system. The jam experience showed that a game that I made in 3 days could hit around the same amount of eyes as another that I'd spent about a half a year creating. I was getting more direct feedback from my peers, and the process felt much more fulfilling. The number one feedback I received on this project was people that did not like the tank controls. The characters move by turning with the left and right arrows, and then moving forward and backwards with the up and down buttons. It's designed this way because it would just be too simple otherwise, and players would never end up losing. All valuable feedback. Playing this game now, it is personally my least favorite of my projects, but still marks a moment in time for my game dev journey. As of this video, Clogtube ended up being my highest jam ratings for audio, innovation, and theme.
Oops. Excuse me. Didn't see you there. My bad.
Six months have passed, and we've now hit early 2024 with Ludum Dare 55. At this point, I'd been pretty excited about the whole jam process and anxious to do another. I spent some time learning a new up-and-coming game engine that was gaining a lot of popularity, Godot. Unity was running into some controversies, and Godot was the open-source competitor made by people for the people. If anyone is watching this looking to get into game creation, I cannot recommend Godot enough. It's free, it's easy to use, and it's getting better with every version. This time around, the theme ended up being summoning. I was still making the transition to Godot, so I came in with a few goals in mind. I wanted something with an extremely bite-sized scope. I wanted to learn more about pixel art and animations. I wanted something that felt akin to a minigame you'd see in a WarioWare or a Mario Party. Hence, Party Wizard was born, a concept that could not be any simpler. A character requests an item, the player is given 4 images, the player selects one, and the titular Party Wizard creates the item. As the rounds go on, the gameplay very literally speeds up, and the objects get more and more obscure and bizarre. Sometimes the player would request something simple, like a cheeseburger or a cup of coffee. Later in the game, they might be looking for the Declaration of Independence, maybe even some medical assistance. The small scope let me make more and more items for this game to make it have the most variety in anything I've ever created. Previous games did have me coding a rarity system, but this one is my first time really doing it. Each item has a different level of rarity, and as rounds progress, rarer items are more likely to appear. An item may only have a 0.1% chance of showing up in the first round, but by the time the player hits round 15, maybe it's ramped up to 10%. This makes the game more and more surprising as it goes on. Visually, while this game is pretty simplistic, it's probably the best looking thing I've ever created. The blinking animation on the party wizard is fantastic, and the game has a cohesive appearance. Even though I do like most of the art in this game, the art styles of some of the items do not always line up. Some items have colored outlines while others don't. There's also varying degrees of realism on the appearance of each requested item. Given more time, this project probably could have been a lot better. I experimented with audio in this game, where the abrasive title screen song ended up being muffled as background music during the entire game, like you're in the back room of a party. It's a neat effect, but most people didn't really pick up on it. This game seems to have unfortunate bugs that occasionally happen. While it seems to be pretty uncommon, I've had reports of items not even being available that are being requested, and I'm fairly certain I've seen it happen myself as well. I'm a bit surprised in such a simple game there could be such a large bug, but that is the life of game creation. The small scope on Party Wizard allowed me to look more at bugs and polish, and have a less stressful jam experience. But unfortunately, things do still slide through the cracks. At the end of the day, Party Wizard ended up being my best ranking game and being my top game in the following categories: overall, fun, graphics, humor, and mood. Party Wizard even just barely missed out being a top 100 game in the humor category. Overall, Party Wizard was my finest jam creation. After starting and giving up on some prototype projects over the next year, I returned to Ludum Dare for event number 57. The prompt for this event was depths, and I wanted to get extremely experimental on this one. I came up with the concept of a mini golf game where all the holes were layered vertically, and if you had a bad putt, you'd fall down to previous levels. After experimenting with an engine, I made the decision to turn the game into 9 levels and theme each of them after the Circles of Hell from Dante's Inferno. With this, Dante's Mini Golf was born. Since it is a game about trying not to fall, I figured it was more logical to have the player climb up them instead of traversing downwards. I got to play around with a lot of new ideas in this one, such as animations that would hide level transitions. I spent a lot of time making a really fun music system where each level instruments would be added into the disjointed soundtrack in real time. As you climbed up in the levels, the instruments would be added, and then as you fell down, they'd be removed. It was really a fun idea. Then I exported the game for browser play, and it no longer worked. I looked into it and found out there's a bug in the current engine that had not been fixed. The version you're seeing here, unfortunately, is not as good as it could be. This was also my first time dealing with physics and angles without any help. The results are terrible. This is a bad feeling golf game. It's much better than it was day one, but in a game where you need to make micro movements and adjustments, it's just hard to play. The game also has an absurd amount of tile sets. I got such a crash course in tile sets on this one. Every single floor has its own graphics and design. Most of them are pretty close to their original designs that I had drawn out when I was planning the game, but some of them are simplified just because I was running low on time. Dante's Mini Golf is not a fun game to play. It's frustrating, it's infuriating, it's anti-gamer, and that's exactly how it was designed to be. I personally do not feel like games always need to be fun to get their point across. Dante's Mini Golf was a risky thing to make for a game jam, and it did not perform well whatsoever. Dante's Mini Golf may on paper be the worst game I've ever made, but it is also actually one of my favorites. It does exactly what it set out to do. It teaches mechanics within the gameplay. It also tells a coherent narrative through the gameplay. Dante's Mini Golf got so many comments about it being too hard from a website where on average they might have spent 5 minutes with any of your games. The second someone took a big tumble, they were out of there. I think very few people to this date have ever finished Dante's Mini Golf. I have probably finished it half a dozen times or so, but I know very few people that have actually gotten to the end. Surprisingly though, it is a game that gets easy with practice. Dante's Mini Golf is not my best ranked game in a single category. At this point, I became a bit frustrated and jaded with the Ludum Dare rating process. I made a game that I knew was going to perform poorly and could use a lot of constructive feedback on, yet a lot of the comments ended up being overly positive. I was starting to find the comment system on the site to be a bit performative. While this is great for encouragement, it's tough for trying to hone a craft. It was around this time that I was really starting to notice generic comments coming in, ratings from people who clearly did not even play the game. It's pretty easy to tell if someone hasn't played your game. I have the stats to back it up. You'll get reviews on days where there were 0 people playing the game. An unfortunate side effect of the feedback system is that people will just spam reviews on different games to get more people to play theirs. Well, I don't think it really affects averages too much since everyone has to deal with this. It's also just makes the feedback feel lesser as you question what is or isn't real. At the end of Ludum Dare 57, I had made the decision that I probably would not come back and do another one. You'd think that would be the end of the Jam story, but nope. Behind the scenes, it felt like Ludum Dare might actually be winding down as a Jam. Well, I actually wanted to join the last one 6 months ago. It unfortunately dropped on a weekend where I just was unavailable to give it my full attention. A few weeks ago was Ludum Dare 59, and the announcement that it would all be ending with Ludum Dare 64. Just a few more opportunities to take place in one of these events as they are now. This time around, the theme was Signals, which personally was a theme that I loathed. Of all my entries, my newest one is perhaps the weakest connection to theme. I made a game where you serve customers using a manual and the power of your voice. Mick Foley's is a fictional restaurant chain where robots craft all the food, but can only take orders via sound effect Foley work. As days advance, the orders get more and more complex. The manual adds pages that get more and more complicated. This idea was loosely based around the Chinese room experiment. You never actually see any of the food items. You're just converting customers' orders into sounds. This game let me experiment with a lot of things. From a programming stance, this was my crash course in dictionaries, more so than I've done in previous projects. Mick Foley's is mostly an experiment in audio. It's fun randomly clicking around and making a symphony of noises before a day starts. Each item has 3 sound effects that play at random. Characters speak in random pitches and speed when they make their orders. They have different levels of patience and different tipping abilities, something that unfortunately did not make it into the full version of the game. At times, the game can be cumbersome and tedious to play, but once you find the groove, it can be a pretty zen-like experience. At the end of the day, even success in McFoley's doesn't feel like much as the company takes the majority of your earnings. A good day might net you a few bucks. A bad day might cost you everything. Mick Foley's was the first thing I coded outside of a couple of failed prototypes since the release of Dante's Mini Golf. I had to do a lot of work reacquainting myself with Godot and programming in general. I went in with the goal of honing in on a few different programming concepts, and the project went very smoothly from day one. Things came together on schedule, and throughout testing, very few major bugs were found. The rating process is still ongoing, but I anticipate this will be at least my highest ranked game for the audio category. Based on feedback, I'd also assume it'll do well in humor, as all of my games previously have. I've also learned a lot about design on this project, as I have seen some people playing the game completely unsure of what they need to be doing in it. There'll always be a portion of gamers who refuse to read any text put in front of them, and this game really proved that. The biggest lesson I've learned is while you can learn something from all feedback, not all feedback is created equal. A big part of the process is knowing what is and isn't important to create a good experience down the line. I still have some of the same issues with the jam system as I did last time I participated in one. I don't think whatever my grades end up being when they are released in a week will change any of that. The game jam experience is always a unique one, and there's a lot of ways you can go about it. If you're considering joining one, I will always say it's worth trying at least once. If you don't think you have the abilities to do one, trust me, if I can do this, anyone can. Just make a project based around the limits of what you can do. From here, I hope to try to make something a little bit more like my first game. I want the practice of making a nice polished game experience to practice some of those testing and polish skills that jams really just don't allow time for. Whether or not that happens, only time will tell. My games have always been a reflection of me, and I hope to continue that if nothing else. Thank you for watching.